Vivid verses.
The first time I met her family, I told them I worked in finance. That was true in the way that saying the ocean is wet is true, accurate, and useless for understanding anything about it. Her father, a big, ruddy man named Warwick who ran a haulage company he was proud of in the specific way men are proud of things they built with their hands, looked me over once. Cheap jacket, scuffed shoes I'd worn on purpose because the good ones felt like overdressing for a Sunday roast, and said finance, right? Insurance, is it? Or one of them call centers? I could have said neither. I could have said I ran a private trading desk that managed just under 200 million pounds of other people's money, that I'd started out of a spare room 11 years ago, that the modest flat I'd told them about was one of 4 properties I owned outright. I said something like that. Rowan squeezed my hand under the table. I didn't know yet whether the squeeze meant don't worry about him or please don't embarrass me. I've since learned it was neither. It was reflex. She wasn't managing the moment for my sake. She was managing it because she'd already decided somewhere underneath the parts of her I could see that the moment needed managing. I let it go. That's the thing about me nobody in that family ever understood. Not once in 6 years. I don't correct people who've made up their minds about me. Not because I'm timid. Because it costs me nothing to let them be wrong, and it would cost me something, attention, energy, a kind of performance I've never had patience for, to make them right. If a man wants to believe I'm beneath his daughter, my believing otherwise doesn't require his permission. So I let Warwick believe I was a call center man who'd landed, against odds, a woman his family considered several tiers above me. I let her mother, Deidre, ask twice within the first year whether I'd thought about doing a course, retraining, something with a bit more of a future in it. I let her brother Colton, 3 years younger than Rowan and employed at their father's firm doing something with logistics software, refer to me at a christening as whatever his name does. I remembered his name from the first time we met. I always remember names. It's a habit from the job. You don't forget the names of people whose money you're responsible for, and you don't forget the names of people who might one day be useful, and you never let either group know you've made that calculation. Colton never remembered mine unless Rowan said it first. We married in the 2nd year. Small wedding, her family's choice more than mine. Warwick footed most of it, which meant Warwick set most of the terms, right down to the seating chart that put my side of the room, for people including my mother, at a table near the kitchen doors. I didn't mind the table. I minded, faintly, that nobody asked whether I minded. But minding faintly isn't the same as minding enough to say something, and I've never confused the two. What I did, instead, in the run-up to the wedding, was meet with a solicitor named Priya Anand who I'd worked with for years and trusted the way I trust very few people, which is to say, based entirely on demonstrated competence and never on warmth. We drew up a prenuptial agreement. Rowan signed it without much comment. I'd framed it, honestly, as standard practice for anyone running a business, which it is, and she didn't push. I don't think she read it closely. I don't think, if I'm honest, she thought there was much in it worth reading closely, because I don't think she'd yet worked out there was much to protect. The agreement ring-fenced the business, its holding company, and everything acquired through it, past and future, as mine alone. It left the marital home, which I bought outright before the wedding, in my name, and which she moved into, as mine as well, with a clause granting her right to remain for a defined period in the event of divorce, negotiated generously, because I am not a cruel man and I didn't intend to become one. It said nothing about what I earned being shared, because nothing about what I earned was ever going to be shared by default. That's not coldness. That's just how a man protects the thing he spent a decade building before he knew her name. I told myself, in those early years, that the distance I kept, the accounts she never saw, the balances of the meetings I never discussed over dinner, the modest car I drove despite owning, at the time, 3 others registered to the company, was simply prudence. Every man in my position does this. You don't hand someone a map to your whole fortune 3 years into knowing them, no matter how much you love them. Love and financial disclosure are not the same act of trust, whatever the film suggests. What I didn't yet know, what I told myself, actively was not true in the specific way you tell yourself something when some part of you has already started suspecting otherwise, was that the distance had started to run both directions. The furniture happened in year 3. Warwick was downsizing. Moving Deidre into a bungalow after a knee replacement made the stairs impossible, and it was assumed, without anyone quite asking, that I'd come and help move the big pieces. Not asked exactly. Rowan mentioned it the way she mentioned most obligations to her family, as fact, not request. Dad wants to get the wardrobe and the dresser done Saturday. You'll be around, yeah? I was around. I spent 4 hours carrying furniture down a narrow staircase with Colton and a neighbor's lad who couldn't have been older than 19, while Warwick supervised from the bottom of the stairs with the specific authority of a man who has never once carried anything heavier than a clipboard in his adult life. At one point, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, to the neighbor's lad, not to me, "This one's stronger than he looks. Good with his hands, this." I said nothing. I have good hands for a spreadsheet and a phone call. Not much else, but there was no version of that sentence that would have landed the way I'd have wanted it to, so I didn't say it. Later that same year, at Deidre's birthday, I overheard her telling a cousin. Not quietly, not carefully, just in the unguarded way people talk when they've stopped considering whether you're listening, that Rowan could have done better for herself, obviously, but he's steady, and steady count for something at her age. I was 34. Rowan was 32. I don't know what age Deidre imagined made steadiness a consolation prize rather than a virtue, but I filed the comment away with the others. In the part of my mind I've always kept for information rather than injury. That's important, I think, to understanding what I am. I don't experience these moments as wounds. I experience them as data. A man who reacts to every slight as an injury spends his whole life bleeding. A man who reacts to every slight as information spends his life knowing things other people don't realize they've told him. By year 3, I knew a great deal about how Rowan's family saw me. What I didn't yet know, what I still stubbornly protected myself from knowing, was how Rowan saw me herself. I found out by accident, the way most true things surface, not through confrontation, but through carelessness. It was a Thursday in early spring. Rowan had left her laptop open on the kitchen island, logged into her email, while she went to take a call in the other room. I wasn't looking for anything. I want to be honest about that, because a different kind of man might dress this up as suspicion vindicated, some long campaign of checking up on her. And it wasn't that. I was refilling my coffee, and the screen simply hadn't gone to sleep yet. And there, mid-page, was a thread with her sister-in-law-to-be, Nessa, Colton's fiancée, whom I liked, in the distant way you like people you've never had a real conversation with. The subject line was about wedding planning, something unrelated to me. But partway down the thread, Nessa had written, "LOL, your dad still doesn't get what he actually does he? Does he even know, face with tears of joy?" And Rowan had replied, "Don't get me started. Honestly, when we first started seeing each other, I almost didn't tell Mom and Dad for like 3 months BC. I knew exactly what Dad's face would do. He's lovely, but he's just so unremarkable, like sweet, safe, boring. I used to worry it'd look bad, TBH. I got over it. Mostly. I read it twice. Then I closed the laptop, gently, the way you'd close a door on a room you didn't want the draft to escape from, and I finished making my coffee, and I did not say a single word about it that night, or the next night, or ever. Mostly. I've turned that word over more times than I could count. Not the unremarkable, not the boring. Those I could file away easily enough, because they were simply wrong, a misreading based on incomplete information, the kind of error I make my living correcting in other contexts. What stayed with me was mostly, it meant she hadn't fully gotten over it. It meant that 6 years and some active, ongoing part of my life still measured me against a standard her family had set before they'd ever really looked at me, and found me acceptable only in the diminished, apologetic way you find a decent used car acceptable. Steady. Safe. Got over it. Mostly, I didn't confront her. I want to be clear that this wasn't restraint in the performative sense, gritting my teeth, biding my time until some satisfying reveal. It was simpler and colder than that. I genuinely did not see what confronting her would produce, other than a conversation in which she apologized, minute in the moment, and I'd have no way of ever verifying whether the apology changed anything real. Confrontation is for people who believe talking fixes what a person actually thinks of you. I've never believed that. What a person actually thinks of you shows up in what they do when they believe you're not looking. I've just been shown what she did. Talking about it would only give her the chance to perform having not done it. So I filed it. The same drawer, mentally, where I'd filed Warwick's call center and Deidre's steady counts for something, and Colton's failure to remember my name. Except this file was heavier, and it sat closer to the front. Over the following months, nothing in my behavior changed in any way a casual observer could have named. I still went to the Sunday roasts. I still helped move things when asked, though I noticed now, with a kind of clean detachment, exactly how often I was asked and exactly how rarely anyone asked what I needed help with in return. I was still, by every visible measure, the same steady, unremarkable man Rowan had described. That was rather the point. What changed was quieter and entirely mine. I'd been sitting on an acquisition for the better part of a year, a smaller advisory firm, family-run, whose founder wanted to retire and whose client book would have roughly doubled my firm's assets under management. I'd been slow-walking the decision, partly for sound commercial reasons, partly, I now recognize, because some sentimental corner of me had been waiting to discuss it with Rowan first, to make her part of the milestone the way a normal husband might. After the email, I stopped waiting. I called Priya, restructured the financing so the acquisition ran entirely through the company's existing capital rather than anything that could ever touch joint assets. Not that there were meaningful joint assets to touch, but I wanted no ambiguity, no future argument, no chance for anyone to later claim a stake in something built on a foundation she'd never bothered to ask about, and closed the deal in April. Rowan found out I'd taken on a bit more work the way she found out most things about my job. In passing, unbothered, uninterested in the specifics. I also moved the marital home's freehold into a separate holding structure I'd been meaning to set up for 2 years and had, if I'm honest, been putting off out of something like laziness or misplaced trust or both. It cost me a modest sum in legal fees and a few afternoons with Priya. It changed nothing about how Rowan and I lived. It changed everything about what would happen to that house if we ever stopped living that way. None of this, I want to stress, was punitive. I didn't do any of it to hurt her, and I'd resist anyone who called it revenge, because revenge requires heat, and I felt none. What I felt was closer to what you feel when you learn a bridge you've been driving over for years has a hairline fracture in a support beam. You don't blow the bridge up in anger. You simply stop driving your most valuable cargo across it, and you quietly build another road. I kept being kind to her. That's the part people find hardest to understand when I've tried, in the years since, to explain any of this to the very few people I've explained it to at all. I didn't grow cold. I didn't withdraw affection or intimacy or the ordinary daily generosities of a marriage. Cooking her favorite meal on a bad day, remembering her mother's chemotherapy follow-up date before she did, sitting with her at 2 a.m. when her father had a health scare that turned out, in the end, to be nothing. All of that continued because none of that had ever been about her family's opinion of me, or even really about hers. It was about the kind of husband I'd decided to be, a decision I'd made independently of anyone's assessment of my worth, including my wife's. But underneath the kindness, something had finished. Not the marriage, not yet, not for me, that is separate and later question, but the trust, specifically the trust that had let me imagine for 6 years that I was slowly closing a gap between what her family saw and what was true, and that Rowan was on my side of that gap, quietly waiting with me for the moment it closed. I now understood she'd never been waiting. She'd simply been enduring the same way I had, except I hadn't known we were enduring the same thing from opposite directions. The reveal, when it came, wasn't anything I engineered. I want to be honest about that too, because there's a satisfying story available here. The wrong man orchestrating a grand unveiling, some dinner table moment where he produces the evidence of his greatness and watches everyone choke on their wine. And it isn't what happened, and I don't think it's who I am. What happened was smaller and stranger. Colton's fiancée, Nessa, worked in commercial property, and in June she was handling the leasing for a new office development in the city. New build, glass and steel, the kind of building that gets a paragraph in the local business press when it opens. My firm had signed for 2 floors that spring. Quietly, the way I signed for most things through the company rather than through me personally, with my name attached only in the filings a person would need a specific reason to go looking for. Nessa was at the building for a walkthrough with the client-facing team the week before opening. I happened to be there too, going over furniture layouts with the office manager, in a shirt that wasn't cheap and hadn't been chosen to look like anything other than what it was. She saw me before I saw her. I watched the recognition land on her face in stages. First confusion, because context was wrong. A man she associated with in-laws' dining rooms, standing in the wrong building, doing the wrong things. Then a kind of scrambling recalculation, visible if you knew to look for it, as she connected my name on her clipboard's tenant list to the man in front of her. Then, finally, something close to alarm, the specific alarm of a person realizing they've said things about someone within earshot of. People who talk to that someone regularly. Yours, she started. This is your company? The whole. She gestured at the floor, the view, the glass. 2 floors of it, I said. For now. She didn't ask anything else. She didn't need to. I watched her do the maths on her face in real time, and I knew, with the particular clarity I usually reserve for reading a balance sheet, that the maths wouldn't stay contained to her. Nessa was many things, but discreet, in my experience of her, was not chief among them. I was right. She told Colton within the week. I'll never know exactly how she framed it, whether with admiration or the specific mortification of someone realizing her own joke had a much larger, much more expensive punchline than she'd understood. And Colton told his parents within the week after that, and by the time of Deidre's birthday dinner in July, 6 weeks after Nessa saw me in that lobby. The whole family had assembled a version of the story that had clearly been circulating, refining itself, gathering detail with each retelling the way these things do. I didn't attend that dinner planning to say anything. I attended it the way I'd attended every family dinner for 6 years, politely, quietly, prepared to be underestimated, because I'd stopped expecting anything else and had, if I'm honest, stopped particularly minding. What I hadn't prepared for, what no amount of filing things away in drawers had readied me for, was watching it land on Rowan specifically. Warwick brought it up almost immediately, which surprised me. I'd expected more circling, more the family's usual talent for pretending not to notice things until noticing became unavoidable. But he was 3 drinks in, and pride, in a man like Warwick, has never been a patient emotion. So, he said, halfway through the starter, in a tone I hadn't heard him use with me before, careful, almost deferential, a register I don't think he'd ever had to reach for around me and clearly wasn't sure how to hold. Nessa was saying, The new building, the glass one on the river. That's yours, is it? Some of it. Most of 2 floors, I said. The company leases it. I run the company. Right. He nodded slowly, the way men like Warwick nod when they're buying time to reassemble a worldview. And what is that, then? What you actually do? I told him in about 4 sentences, the same 4 sentences I could have told him 6 years earlier at that first dinner, if anyone had asked with any real curiosity instead of assumption. Assets under management. Client base. The acquisition in April, which I mentioned mostly because it was recent and because Deidre had gone very quiet across the table, and I found I had no particular urge to spare her the arithmetic. Deidre, for her part, had stopped eating. Colton was staring at his plate with the specific fixed attention of a man trying very hard not to be looked at. Nessa wouldn't meet my eyes at all, which I understood. She'd been the accidental messenger, and messengers rarely enjoy the moment the message lands. But I wasn't watching any of them, not really. I was watching Rowan. She'd gone still in a way I'd never seen her go still. Not composed, not calm, but frozen, the particular stillness of someone whose internal footing has vanished without warning. She wasn't looking at her father, or her mother, or the table. She was looking at me, and I could see, with the same clean clarity I'd had reading that email months before, that she was doing the same arithmetic her family was doing, except hers had an extra column, theirs didn't. He knew. Not just he's wealthier than we thought. Not just we misjudged him. The specific, private, unbearable calculation of a woman realizing that her husband had known. For months, possibly longer, she couldn't yet know how long. Exactly how she and her family had sized him, had read her own words describing him as unremarkable and safe, and something she'd almost hidden out of embarrassment, and had said nothing. Had kept coming to Sunday roasts. Had kept moving furniture. Had kept being, in every visible way, exactly the steady, unbothered man she described to Nessa, while quietly restructuring his entire financial life around the knowledge that she didn't fully see him and possibly never had. I watch her realize that whatever version of this conversation she might have wanted, an apology extracted from her father, a graceful correction, some version of events where the family's error was the whole story, wasn't available to her because the deeper error was hers, and I'd known about it the entire time. She thought she was the only one holding a private, unspoken truth. "You knew," she said, quietly. Not a question. I didn't answer immediately. The table had gone very silent around us. Warwick mid-recalibration, Deidre pale, Colton and Nessa both suddenly fascinated by their cutlery. "Knew what?" I said, not cruelly, genuinely giving her the chance to name it, or not, whichever she preferred. She didn't say it in front of them. I hadn't expected her to, whatever else was true about that moment. Some instinct in her still wasn't willing to detonate her own privacy for an audience, even one that had already, unknowingly, supplied half the fuse. She just looked at me, and something in her face, I've thought about this a great deal since, try to find a better word for it than the one that keeps arriving, folded. Not dramatically, just a small, total collapse of whatever confident architecture she'd been standing on. The specific one that had let her write sweet, safe, boring to Nessa without imagining a version of a world where I'd ever read it, or where reading it would cost her more than a moment's embarrassment. "Excuse me," she said, to no one and everyone, and left the table. I didn't follow her immediately. I finished my glass of wine. I answered 2 more of Warwick's questions, evenly, without any particular satisfaction in his sudden, clumsy respect, because his respect had never been what I wanted from him, and arriving 6 years too late didn't make it worth much now. Then I thanked Deidre for the dinner, told Colton it was good to see him, and went to find my wife. She was in the car, in the driveway, not driving anywhere. Just sitting. I got on the passenger side. Didn't reach for her hand. Waited. How long? She said eventually. Since April. The email? You left your laptop open in March. I read it by accident, and I didn't stop reading. She flinched at that, small, precise. I didn't mean it the way it. You did, I said. Not sharply. Just true. You meant exactly what you wrote. Mostly. You'd mostly gotten over it. Some part of you never fully did. She didn't argue. I think that's the moment I understood the marriage would survive this, in whatever shape it survived. Not because she denied it, but because she didn't. She sat with it, the way I'd sat with the discovery for months, and I watched her do, in real time, the thing I'd already done privately in April. Recalculate. What did you do? She asked quietly, in April. After you read it, what did you actually do? I could have lied. I could have said nothing, softened it, told her I'd simply carried on. But I've never seen the use in managing someone's feelings with a false accounting, and less use in starting now. I closed an acquisition I've been sitting on, I said. I moved the house into a structure that protects it regardless of what happens between us. I stopped waiting for you to catch up to who I actually am, because I realized you weren't trying to. You didn't say anything. For 4 months, you just went on. Sunday dinners. Moving Dad's wardrobe. All of it. Knowing what I'd said. Yes. Why? Because saying something wouldn't have changed what you already thought, I said. It would only have changed what you performed in front of me afterward. I've never needed you to perform anything. I needed to know what was true. Now I do. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, through the windscreen, I could see the outline of her parents' front room light, could imagine, with total confidence, the conversation happening inside it, the frantic, embarrassed reassessment, Warwick already rehearsing warmer things to say to me at Christmas, Deidre already composing the version of the story where she'd always known there was more to him. None of it interested me. It never had, really. Their respect had been available for 6 years for the price of asking one real question, and none of them had asked it. Its sudden appearance now, purchased by a lobby encounter and a leaked joke, wasn't worth anything to me. I'd stopped needing it somewhere around year 3, without quite noticing I'd stopped. Rowan was the only person in that equation whose judgment had ever mattered to me, and she was the one who'd cost me the most to forgive, precisely because she was the one who'd known better and chosen the easier, smaller red of me anyway. I don't know how to fix this, she said finally. I'm not asking you to fix it tonight, I said. I'm telling you what's true, because you asked, and because you've earned an honest answer, even if you haven't yet earned my full trust back. Both things can be real. She nodded, slowly, and I watched her absorb that, not as a threat, not as an ultimatum, just as fact delivered the same way I deliver every fact, without heat, without theater. It would either be enough of a foundation to rebuild on, or it wouldn't. That wasn't a decision I needed to make in a driveway. Take me home, she said. I drove. Neither of us spoke again until we reached the house. The one that was, as of April, mine alone on paper, hers to live in for as long as this lasted and beyond, if she chose to stay and if I chose to let the paper stop matching. I hadn't decided yet whether it would. That decision, unlike so many others I'd made quietly that spring, I intended to make slowly and out loud, and only once I was certain what I was choosing it for. Inside, she went straight upstairs without a word. I stood in the kitchen for a while. The same kitchen where I'd found the laptop open. The same counter I'd been wiping down when I read 4 lines that rearranged 6 years without a sound. I made myself a coffee, the way I had that night, because some habits don't ask permission to continue, they simply continue. Then I sat down at the table where I'd once been seated near the kitchen doors, at a wedding that had never once made me feel I needed correcting, and I drank it slowly, exactly as calm as I've been the day I met her family, exactly as calm as I intend to remain for however long this takes to settle. Because nothing about tonight had changed who I was. It had only, finally, shown everyone else who I'd been the entire time.
Thanks for listening.